Let your mind drift. Let your mind drift to a narrow street, lit by the soft, golden glow of paper lanterns. The air is still, warm with the scent of incense and rain-damp wood. The tapping of sandals echoes faintly on the cobblestones. Somewhere, just beyond sight, the delicate strum of a shamisen begins. Measured, intentional, patient. This is Hanamachi, the flower town. Not a place on any modern map, but a hidden quarter in the old cities of Kyoto and Tokyo. A world behind painted doors, silk curtains, and practiced smiles. Here lived the geisha, neither a courtesan nor a wife, but something more elusive, an artist of presence, a guardian of tradition, a woman of profound discipline and grace. And tonight, you will become one. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and imagine yourself not as a guest in the tea house, but as the one who kneels before the coals, who pours the sake, who commands the room with a glance and a turn of the wrist. Tonight, you live another life. A life shaped by ritual, by stillness, by performance, but not pretense. Let us begin. You are awake before sunrise, long before the guests arrive, long before the hairpins and the laughter, long before you are beautiful, because first you must become quiet. Your room is small, tatami mats underfoot, no bed, only a rolled futon. Your possessions are few, a wooden comb, a folded cloth, a brush. The house is still. You rise in silence. There are others like you here, sisters in a sense, though not by blood. Some are older, some younger. All are students. All are learning the same thing, to disappear so that others may dream. You begin the day with cleaning. You sweep the entrance, polish the wooden floor, wipe down the porcelain, water the small garden in the back. No one praises you. It is simply what must be done. At the Ochaya, the tea house, nothing is rushed. Nothing is out of place. Even this, the wiping of the step, is training. For your movements must always be smooth, measured, precise. Even a bow must be rehearsed. After chores comes practice. You are not yet a geisha. You are a meiko, an apprentice, young, unmarried, still in the chrysalis of training. In the morning, you kneel before the shamisen, 3 strings, a plectrum as wide as your palm. The teacher corrects your fingers. Again, again. In the afternoon, you recite poetry. In old Kyoto dialect, you memorize phrases not used in the streets. Words meant to soothe, to flatter, to intrigue. Later, you walk with a book balanced on your head, to keep your posture from faltering. You learn to pour tea without a ripple, to laugh without showing your teeth, to speak without speaking over anyone, to carry a conversation without ever making it about yourself. The training takes years. You begin around 13, but you will not be called Geisha until you are at least 20, and even then, only if you endure. You do not choose your kimono. The house decides. You do not set your schedule. The proprietress does. You do not eat much. The obi, the broad belt at your waist, is tied so tightly you must learn to move with shallow breaths. The white makeup is applied in layers, not just to cover, but to transform. It is a mask and a mirror at night. You become the image. The room is lit by lanterns. Low tables are arranged. Cushions are placed with care. You enter without speaking. Your steps are silent. Your neck is painted in a deep V, a symbol of elegance and invitation. A glimpse of skin, but not seduction. You bow, you serve. You pour the sake. You listen, and you laugh softly at the guest's joke, not because it's funny, but because it is your role to keep the atmosphere light. Sometimes you dance, not for applause, not for admiration, but to embody a mood, a poem, a season. In spring, you might perform the story of cherry blossoms falling. In autumn, a farewell by the riverbank. Every gesture is controlled. Every turn of the wrist, every flick of the fan. Deliberate. You do not smile broadly. Your expression is calm, serene, a canvas on which others project their own longing. You are paid not for affection, but for presence. And even then, only if her calendar allows. You are expensive, not because you seek wealth, but because mastery takes time. Your conversation is worth more than gold, not because of what you say. You become the perfect guest to your guest. Still, the world outside is never far. You hear the gossip. Which merchant has gone bankrupt? Which samurai has left his wife? You learn to read faces, to soothe egos, to protect your sisters and yourself. Sometimes a patron offers more than words. Sometimes one wishes to sponsor you, to pay for your kimono, your lodging, your life. You may accept or not. To be a geisha is to balance on a fine thread between independence and tradition, between intimacy and illusion. You belong to no one, yet your art belongs to all who witness it. Years pass, you rise from Mineko to Geisha. Your hair is dressed more simply now, your kimono more subdued. You wear less color, but more command. The room quiets when you enter. You no longer bow so deeply. You no longer laugh too easily. You have earned your name. And when you grow tired of the hours, the weight of the silk, it pretends of youth. You retire. You return to your family, or open your own house. You take on apprentices. You teach them the music, the manners, the meaning. Your fingers are calloused. Your back aches, but you move with the memory of 1,000 dances. To live as a geisha was not easy. It was not glamorous. It was not free. But it was beautiful. Because it was disciplined. Because it was chosen. Because it was fleeting. Like the cherry blossoms you once danced for. Here, then gone, but never forgotten. There are moments, rare and quiet, when you are alone, between appointments, after a long walk home in the evening. Your feet ache from the wooden okubo sandals, high and clumsy, yet part of the performance. You remove your wig carefully, the scent of camellia oil lingering on your skin. Q. Sit in silence, looking at your face in the small mirror, your features blurred beneath white paint and red pigment, and you wonder, who am I beneath it? The geisha wears many faces, not to deceive, but to preserve, to hold back part of herself, even while giving everything. That is the paradox of your art. You are visible, but never exposed, present, but never possessed. Your body becomes memory. You no longer think about how to kneel, how to bow, how to serve. Your muscles remember the precise movements, the pauses between phrases, the space between footsteps, even how you cry, should the need arise, must be practiced. A lady of the arts does not sob. She folds sadness gently into her voice, like silk. And so you become an expert in silence. In how to endure, there is a sisterhood, too. The other Meiko, your peers, are not always your friends. Sometimes they compete for attention, for sponsors, for praise. But in the quiet moments, you share warmth. You help each other tighten the obi. You whisper jokes in the dressing room. You cry together when an elder retires. There are late nights when you sit in your shared room, feet tucked beneath your robes, nibbling on sweet bean cakes, watching the rain fall on the paper screens. You talk of dreams you no longer speak aloud, of families left behind, of men who smile but never stay. In that stillness, there is comfort, a bond only those who live behind the curtain can understand. The okiya, the geisha house, is your home. Its matriarch, the okasan, is not your mother by birth, but she raised you in this world. She taught you the rules, the rituals, the risks. She holds the ledgers, keeps your earnings until you have repaid your training. Some okasan are kind, others cold, but all demand perfection. A stain on your kimono is not just laundry, it is shame. A missed appointment is not just late, it is dishonor. But if you succeed, if you endure, you bring prestige to her house, and one day you may even inherit it. The seasons govern everything. In spring, you perform for the cherry blossom festivals. The hanami, flower viewing, brings guests from far and wide. In summer, you sweat beneath your layers, fanning guests gently while sipping cold tea. Autumn means maple leaves, red and gold, and dances that evoke the fading of things. Winter is hardest. You walk in snow. Cold settles in your sleeves. But the houses are warm, the parties brighter, and your presence is a flicker of light in the long nights. Each season changes your wardrobe, your dances, your poetry. Even your makeup adjusts slightly. A whisper of color for spring, a heavier line for winter's drama. Everything you wear says something. You learn to read the patrons. A wealthy merchant may brag loudly, but shrink beneath the sharp wit of a seasoned geisha. A young samurai may blush at a glance, unaccustomed to being outmaneuvered in conversation. An older patron, perhaps a regular, may say nothing at all, yet return again and again, just to hear you hum a lullaby from his childhood. You do not judge, you do not seduce. You offer a reflection of what they long to see. You become what the moment needs. Some patrons ask for your company regularly. Some offer gifts, a comb, a scroll, imported perfume. Some offer to sponsor you. A dana pays for your lifestyle. In return, he may hope for loyalty, perhaps affection, but it is never simple. You may choose to accept, or you may decline. Even within tradition, there is choice, a quiet kind of agency, and this too is part of your identity, to carry grace even in refusal. When the tea house closes, when the kimono is folded and the hair unpinned, you walk home slowly through the lantern-lit alleys. It is late. Your feet drag a little. Your posture softens. The air smells of ash, night flowers, and distant sea breeze. You pass a shuttered shop, a closed temple gate, a cat weaving between lantern poles. In these moments, you are not a geisha, not an artist, not an entertainer. You are simply yourself. Who that is, exactly, you're still learning. You remember your first performance, the nervous breath, the flutter in your stomach, the way your voice quivered just slightly on the first note. Now, you don't feel fear, only rhythm. Your life is a choreography, not always elegant, but always measured. And when the day comes, as it must, that you step away from it all, you do so with reverence. You leave behind shoes polished by habit, routines shaped by centuries, and a legacy woven quietly into memory. Being a geisha is not about being known. It is about being remembered. not by name, always, but by the echo of a song. The scent of incense, the soft rustle of silk in a dream. It is not a life of ease, not a life of fame, but it is a life of beauty, of discipline, of control, and, paradoxically, of freedom. Because it is a life you choose over and over in 1,000 small ways. So now, let yourself drift to a quiet room, to a folded futon, to the distant sound of a shamisen's final note. Breathe in the stillness. Let the scent of powdered skin and tatami mats wash over you. You have walked far, you have danced long, and you have given everything without ever breaking. Now, you may rest. And so you lie back, arms at your side, the weight of memory soft against your chest. You think of the fans you folded, the faces you served, the music that moved through your fingers like wind through reeds. Tomorrow will come as it always does. There may be new dances, new appointments, new silences to maintain. But for now, the world is still. You have given yourself to art, to beauty, to service, and now, at last, the moment is yours. Rest, dear Geisha. The lanterns have dimmed, the shamisen has quieted, and the city sleeps. So may you. She was the most famous geisha of her time, a name whispered with reverence in the halls of Kyoto's most exclusive tea houses, Ki. And yet, she is also the woman who walked away. To understand her story, you must walk carefully, not through myth, but through memory, not through glamour, but through quiet rebellion. Mineko Iwasaki was born in 1949 in a Japan that was both ancient and changing. The Second World War had ended. The cities were rebuilding, but the geisha world remained elegant, strict, uncompromising. She was born Masako Tanaka, the fourth of 10 children, but by the time she was 5 years old, she had entered the world of the Okiya. The geisha house became her new home, its quiet corridors, its stern matriarch, its rituals and rules. She became Mineko Iwasaki, a name chosen for her by her geisha mother, and with it, she inherited a legacy. Her training was intense. Every day was a lesson in endurance, in the art of appearance, in knowing when to speak and when to disappear. She studied traditional dance from dawn until dusk. Kyomai, the subtle, graceful movements of Kyoto, more restrained than Tokyo's styles, more ancient, more difficult. She learned the shamisen, the tea ceremony, calligraphy, and poetry. Every gesture mattered. Every word was measured. Even her walk was practiced for hours in heavy wooden sandals on gravel paths to teach control and poise. At just 15 years old, she debuted as a Meiko, a dancing girl. A step below Geisha, but already radiant. She wore the ornate kimono of youth, vibrant colors, long sleeves, a hairstyle adorned with fresh flowers. People turned to look as she passed, not because she called attention to herself, but because she was simply a presence. Within a few short years, Mineko Iwasaki became the most sought-after geisha in all of Japan. Her calendar was always full. She entertained actors, artists, royalty, politicians. She danced before Prince Charles. She dined with foreign dignitaries. She was the living symbol of Kyoto's old-world grace. But with fame came pressure. She was expected to perform perfectly every night, expected to smile even when exhausted, to listen even when her heart was heavy, to remain flawless even as she questioned everything. She began to see the cracks in the world she had given her life to. She saw younger geisha struggling with debt, bound to the okia by contracts they could not escape. She saw patrons treat her like an ornament, beautiful but silent. She saw tradition become burden. Mineko worked herself until she collapsed. Literally, her health failed. She fainted during a performance. The doctors warned her, "Continue like this, and you will not last." And still, she danced. Because that was what was expected. But inside, a change had begun. She began asking, what is this life for? Was beauty worth exhaustion? Was grace worth invisibility? At age 29, the peak of her fame, Mineko Iwasaki did the unthinkable. She retired. She left behind the world that had raised her, turned away from the fame, returned her name to silence, and Kyoto's Hanamachi mourned. For years, she remained quiet. She married. She raised a family. She stepped out of the spotlight. But her story was not yet finished. In 1997, the American author Arthur Golden published a novel, Memoirs of a Geisha. It became a bestseller. The world was captivated by its depictions of tea houses, of painted women, of forbidden love. But for Mineko, it was betrayal. She had spoken to the author in confidence, under an agreement of anonymity. But her name was used anyway. And worse, the story, in her eyes, was false. The novel portrayed geisha as little more than glorified courtesans, a world of sexual favors and jealous rivalries, of love affairs and coercion. Mineko Iwasaki was devastated. She had spent her life preserving an art form, honoring discipline, defending dignity. And now, the world knew geisha through the lens of fiction, not fact. She received hate mail, death threats. Rumors and lies spread through the geisha community. She had not just left the world. She had, some said, betrayed it. So she answered. In 2002, she published her own memoir, Geisha, A Life. It was quiet, measured, just like her. In it, she told the truth, as she had lived it. The beauty, the pain, the structure, and the sacrifice. She explained the difference between geisha and courtesans. She reclaimed the dignity of her profession. She reminded the world that being a geisha was not about seduction, but about service, discipline, and art. It was a different kind of rebellion. Not loud, not angry, but precise and necessary. Mineko Iwasaki remains a figure of quiet revolution. She did not burn the tradition down. She walked away with grace. She spoke when she was ready, and when she did, she told the world, we were artists, not mistresses. She gave voice to those who had none. And then she stepped back into the shadows. To reflect on her life is to see the paradox of geisha, to be elevated yet restrained, visible yet silenced, adored yet alone. Mineko Iwasaki lived in that space between. She mastered the performance, then dared to unmask herself. In doing so, she preserved not just her name, but the truth of her world. And so, as you lie here, think of her, a woman in a crimson kimono, kneeling before the mirror, her face half painted, half bare, between illusion and identity, between silence and voice. She was more than a dancer, more than a hostess, more than a name in a book. She was the one who remembered, and the one who refused to be forgotten. Mineko Iwasaki's days were not just filled with elegance and charm. They were governed by a strict and relentless rhythm. She would wake hours before the city stirred, before the lanterns were lit, before any music played. Her hair had to be styled by professionals. Traditional wax, iron combs, intricate buns. Some styles were so elaborate she had to sleep with her head balanced on a wooden pillow to preserve the shape. Then came the makeup, white face paint, carefully layered, a red tint along her eyes and lips, black lacquered brows drawn in graceful arches. Her kimono was no less demanding. These were not simple garments, but entire sculptures in fabric, heavy embroidered silks that weighed more than 10 pounds, layers for formality, colors dictated by season, and above all, the obi, the wide belt, which could take half an hour to tie correctly. Dressed and silent, she would descend into the world of performance. But Mineko did not simply perform. She embodied. Her style was known for its precision. Unlike some of her peers who excelled in flirtation or boldness, Minako's charm was quiet, measured, refined. She made the difficult appear effortless. When she danced, it was as though time slowed. Her sleeves fluttered like cranes. Her fingers painted invisible stories in the air. Guests sometimes held their breath without realizing it, as though they, too, were afraid to break the spell. This was the heart of the geisha's power. Not seduction, but control of atmosphere. Mineko could walk into a crowded room and turn it tranquil, not by speaking, but by being present. Yet no amount of applause could mask the toll behind the silk, the smiles, and the reputation. Was a woman pushing herself far beyond what most would dare. There were weeks she worked without a single day off, sometimes up to 8 appointments a night. She danced through illness, exhaustion, even injury. One evening, her ankle gave out in the middle of a performance. She bowed out gracefully, then collapsed backstage. Another time, she danced with a fever, her vision blurring. Her movements guided only by memory and instinct. Why? Because this was what the profession demanded. Geisha were not just entertainers. They were institutions. And failure, even fatigue, was not part of the script. But with time, the strain became too much. Mineko began to question the very foundation of her world. Why were geisha expected to sacrifice everything? Why were younger girls treated as commodities? Why was tradition used to silence dissent? She had reached the peak of fame, and still she felt caged. So she did what few had the courage to do. She left, and not quietly. Her departure was symbolic. A geisha walking away, not in shame, but in self-preservation. She wanted to live, to breathe, to define herself beyond the expectations of others. In the years that followed, Mineko lived a more private life. She married, had a daughter, and began to rediscover her voice. She explored painting, returned to classical dance on her own terms. She remained elegant, always, but she was no longer defined by what she wore or how she served. Then came the moment that thrust her back into public view. The publication of memoirs of a geisha. It was a global phenomena, translated into dozens of languages, adapted into a major motion picture, celebrated for its supposed authentic depiction of geisha life. But to Mineko, it was an affront. The book suggested that geisha were bought, that their relationships were transactional, that their dignity was negotiable. Worst of all, it claimed to be based on a true account, hers. Though Arthur Golden never used her exact words, he had interviewed her. He had promised anonymity and then broken it. Mineko received criticism not only from the world, but from the geisha community itself. They saw her name in the credits. They saw the film, and they believed she had sold them out. She was shunned, threatened, hurt. And yet, she remained composed. Rather than lash out, she wrote Geisha, a life, a memoir of her own. It was not dramatic, not embellished. It was careful, elegant, restrained, just like her. She told the world what being a geisha really meant. She described the discipline, the rituals, the history. She rejected the fantasy and reclaimed the truth. And perhaps, most powerfully, she refused to allow herself to be misrepresented again. She had learned, finally, that her silence was no longer required. In the years since, Mineko Iwasaki has become a quiet icon. To some, she is still controversial. To others, a feminist figure. But to many young women in Japan, she represents something deeper. The right to shape your own story. She has given interviews, spoken about the complexities of her past, and continues to advocate for respect toward geisha culture as it truly is, not as a fantasy, but as a living, breathing art. She has reminded the world that geisha are not relics. They are women with boundaries, with power, with voices. Today, few outside Japan understand the real legacy of geisha. They see the white makeup, the fan, the silence, but behind those symbols are centuries of survival. Mineko's story helps us see that. It helps us remember that performance is not submission, that beauty is not always consent, that tradition can coexist with autonomy. She did not need to shout. She simply stood tall, and in doing so, she gave the art of the geisha its most important gift, its humanity. So as your eyes begin to grow heavy, imagine her once more, a young girl in Kyoto, stepping quietly through a garden, her sleeves brushing the grass, a dancer at her peak, illuminated by soft candlelight, a room stilled by the grace of her movement. An older woman, years later, seated calmly before a camera, speaking not as a symbol, but as herself. Mineko Iwasaki, the geisha who remembered, the woman who walked away with her dignity intact. Imagine for a moment you are standing before a lacquered wooden chest in a quiet room. The sliding doors are closed. Only the hush of silk against silk as you lift a folded kimono from its resting place. The cloth is heavy in your hands, smooth, cool, a weight not only of fabric, but of centuries. You are not merely choosing what to wear, you are choosing what to say. Because a kimono is more than clothing, it is a language, and every fold, color, and thread is part of the message. To the untrained eye, a kimono may seem simple, a robe with long sleeves, a wide sash, perhaps a pretty pattern. But to those who lived by its codes, particularly geisha, the kimono was a silent, intricate conversation. It told your age, your rank, your mood, your season. It told where you were going, and sometimes who you were willing to see. And to wear it wrongly was to speak out of turn. Let us begin at the beginning. The word kimono simply means thing to wear. But what we think of today as the classic kimono, structured, symbolic, ceremonial, emerged fully in the Edo period from the 17th century onward. Every part of it carried meaning. The fabric: silk for formal occasions, cotton or hemp for summer and informal wear, lined or padded for winter. The sleeves, long and flowing for unmarried women, shorter and more reserved for older or married women. The patterns, not just decoration, but deeply encoded symbols: cherry blossoms for youth and transience, cranes for longevity, water ripples for calm, pine trees for steadfastness. Even placement mattered. A plum blossom near the hem whispered modesty. A bold chrysanthemum on the back might speak of status. And then the color. Red was youthful, bright, bold. Blue-green for serenity, white for purity or mourning, deep purple for nobility. But even these meanings shifted with era and context. To wear a brightly patterned kimono in autumn, for example, would seem loud, or worse, ignorant. To wear winter motifs in summer might signal grief or nostalgia. The truly skilled could read a person's mood simply from their kimono. For the geisha, mastering this visual language was essential. She could not speak openly about her feelings, but she could wear them. A Mineko, young and new to the world, wore vibrant colors. Her obi, the wide sash, was tied long and flowing down her back. Her sleeves nearly brushed the ground. Her hair adorned with seasonal ornaments, kanzashi flowers carved from tortoiseshell or silk, tiny bells that chimed softly as she moved. It was theatrical, joyful, a visual poetry of youth. A fully fledged geisha, however, wore more subdued tones. Her kimono fit more closely, her obi tied in a more refined knot, her hair often covered by a wig, a symbol of maturity. It was a quiet declaration: I have arrived. But the kimono was not only about beauty. It was about etiquette, respect, context. Wearing the wrong kimono to the wrong event was like showing up to a funeral in sequence. And yet, mistakes did happen. A young Meiko might wear too bold a print to a tea ceremony. A guest might misread the meaning of a geisha's muted color, assuming it meant indifference rather than restraint. That, too, was part of the dance, reading and being read. Perhaps most intimate of all was the act of dressing. Unlike Western clothing, a kimono cannot be easily put on alone. It requires assistance, layers, folds, ties, inner linings, stiffened collars, body pads. For geisha, the dressing process was a ceremony unto itself. Their dressers, often elder women who had once been geisha themselves, would layer each piece with quiet care. The juban, inner robe, the harajuban, the undergarment, then the outer kimono itself, tied carefully with cords called koshi himo. adjusted for symmetry, smoothed for perfection. Then came the obi, a task so complex it could take 15 minutes or more. Finally, the finishing touches. A fan slipped into the fold, a handkerchief tucked just so. To be dressed was to be prepared, not just physically, but mentally. The transformation was total. There is something almost paradoxical in the kimono's power. It restricts movement. It conceals the body, and yet it commands attention. It turns the wearer into a figure of elegance, not by revealing, but by refining. In the stillness of a geisha's walk, in the slow lift of her sleeve, in the way the fabric catches the light, there is grace beyond ornament. The kimono teaches posture. It requires patience. It demands respect. In its silence, it speaks volumes. In ceremonial life, the kimono became even more layered in symbolism. For weddings, the bride might wear the shiromuku, a pure white ensemble from head to toe. White, in this context, did not mean mourning, but rather blankness, a canvas, unmarked, open, to show her readiness to be dyed with her husband's colors, his family, his world. In funerals, white returned again, but now as part of mourning, death, and purification. Black kimonos with family crests, monsuki, were the standard for formal grief. And then there were festival kimonos, painted with riotous joy, summer fireworks, floating lanterns, dragonflies, river waves. For geisha, especially, kimonos were performance costumes as much as garments. Their patterns might mirror the theme of a dance: cherry blossoms for spring, cranes for longevity, ripples for quietude. The audience would not need to be told the story. They would see it, moving slowly across the stage. The kimono was not only an expression of self, it was also a mirror of the world. And the world changed. By the mid-20th century, after the war, Japan's cities were rebuilding. Western fashions arrived in force. Suits, skirts, heels, the kimono, once daily wear, retreated into the realm of the formal. People wore it to coming-of-age ceremonies, 2 weddings, 2 funerals. And yet, in Kyoto's geisha districts, the tradition lived on. A geisha without her kimono was not a geisha. Mineko Iwasaki, like her peers, had an entire wardrobe, often hundreds of pieces, each one selected by season, by event, by guest. Some of her kimonos were museum-worthy, hand-painted by master artisans, dyed with natural pigments, lined with gold thread. She spoke once of the strain of carrying them. Some kimonos weighed more than 15 kilograms when fully dressed, and yet she danced in them, gracefully, effortlessly. The weight was part of the art. But wearing a kimono was not only physical work. It was emotional labor. To dress beautifully while masking pain. to match season, while your own world felt out of sync, to wear symbols of joy, even while aching, and still, the geisha persisted. Because the kimono wasn't for herself. It was for the room, for the guest, for the tradition. She might be tired, she might be ill, but she would still appear, silken and serene, a perfect image wrapped in silent meaning. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, interest in kimono culture began to bloom again, ironically, in part because of the same Western fascination that had once distorted it. Tourists came to Kyoto to see geisha walk the alleyways in twilight. They tried on kimonos in rental shops, some respectful, some merely curious. Fashion designers looked to traditional patterns for inspiration. Kimono silhouettes appeared on runways in Paris, in New York. Even pop culture took note, from anime to cinema, and slowly, the kimono began to speak again, not just of old Japan, but of resilience, of continuity, of beauty that waits patiently to be remembered. Today, some young people are reclaiming the kimono for themselves, not just as costume, but as cultural statement. They wear vintage pieces with sneakers. They tie their obi in playful styles. They mix tradition with modern flair. The language evolves, but it is still speaking. Still whisper meanings into every motif. And somewhere, a young woman folds her kimono after a long evening. She smooths its lines, hangs it to rest, and breathes in the faint trace of incense left behind. To wear a kimono is to step into conversation with time, to participate in a dialogue that stretches across generations. It is not a costume. It is not an affectation. It is memory, ritual, and pride. And for the geisha, it is her second skin. She does not just wear it. She becomes it. So now, as your thoughts begin to slow and the world outside your window softens into hush, imagine yourself standing once more before the chest of folded garments. The paper lantern flickers. Your hands reach for silk. The sleeves slide through your fingers like water. The colors whisper their secrets. You will not speak tonight, but you will be understood. The fabric remembers, and so do you. Let the folds cradle you. Let the symbols rest upon your shoulders. You are wrapped in meaning, and at last, in stillness. The guests have left. The low hum of the tea house quiets to stillness. Only the soft clinking of porcelain being gathered, and the shuffling of slippers in the corridor. You return to your room in the okia, not grand, but yours. A tatami mat, a paper screen, your mirror still faintly lit. You kneel and begin to undo what you carefully created hours ago. Layer by layer, you fold the day away. The hairpins are removed first, one by one. Your scalp exhales with relief. Then the obi, loosened with care. You place it gently, not discarded, but honored. The makeup comes last, a cloth dampened with oil and warmth. The white fades. Your own face emerges, just you, still present, still proud, but no longer performing. In the Hanamachi, time flows differently. You age in seasons. Each year, fewer flowers in your hair. Fewer bold colors, more grace, more quiet. A younger Meiko will come to you, asking how to walk, how to speak, how to hold a gaze. And you will teach her, not by command, but by example. You will show her that silence is not weakness, that beauty does not need to shout, that power, real power, can arrive in the rustle of silk. And then, one day, you too will leave, perhaps not in fanfare, perhaps only a small gathering, a bow, a farewell gift. You'll fold your final kimono, step quietly out the back gate, and disappear into ordinary life. But the Hanamachi will remember. The floorboards will remember your steps. The mirror will remember your face. And the girls who follow will speak your name with reverence. Because you were part of something timeless. Now, rest. The day has passed. The music has faded, and the quiet has returned. The night belongs to you now, and in dreams, perhaps you will dance again. Years from now, others may try to describe your life. Some will say it was ornamental. Some will say it was sacrifice. A few will say it was art, but none will truly know the discipline behind the softness, the silence behind the smile, the hours you gave to every step, every gesture, every glance. You chose this path. You lived within its boundaries. And in doing so, you carved something lasting, an invisible mark in time. You were not the loudest. You were not the freest. But you were a living poem. And now, as the lanterns fade one by one and the city slips into dreams, you return to your quiet place. Tomorrow will come, but tonight you have nothing to perform. Only the peace of having lived beautifully. Breathe in, exhale. By day, the Hanamachi, the Geisha district, seemed like a world unto itself. A quiet corner of Kyoto or Tokyo where the rhythms of old Japan persisted. But in truth, it existed only because of the world outside it. And that world was moneyed. The geisha did not serve the public. They served the elite, and their art refined, subtle, painstakingly preserved, was only possible because someone paid for it. Behind every performance, every silken kimono, every cup of sake poured in perfect rhythm, stood a patron, or, in many cases, a lord. Let us begin in the Edo period, an age of shoguns and samurai, of rigid class hierarchy and ornamental splendor. In this world, the merchant class was rising in wealth, but not in status. And the samurai elite, many of whom were barred from engaging in business, often found themselves cash poor. Still, appearances mattered. And where better to display one's refinement than a geisha house? Here, men of means could demonstrate their taste, their polish, their understanding of the arts. They were not bought or owned, but their time. That could be sponsored, their clothing commissioned, their music and dance lessons paid in advance. A successful geisha might have one or more patrons. A wealthy industrialist, a provincial governor, a theater magnate. These relationships were complex, part business, part sentiment, part tradition, part silent performance. Sometimes there was romance. Often there was not. The boundaries were unspoken and rarely broken. To be a patron meant more than offering money. It meant appearing at events. It meant showing public admiration without possessiveness. It meant understanding the game and playing it with dignity. But not all men did. There were those who treated the hanamachi as playgrounds, who believed money could buy attention or affection, who misunderstood the silence of a geisha as submission, and her smile as promise. These men were gently corrected or quietly avoided, because the geisha world had its own rules, and power here was not loud. It bowed politely, was a shared performance. Behind the scenes, entire systems upheld these relationships. The okiya, the geisha house, managed schedules, payments, etiquette. The okazen, or house mother, negotiated engagements and fees. And the kenbin, the registry office, tracked every performance and transaction. It was a bureaucratic world, dressed in brocade. Contracts were verbal, but honored as if signed. Reputation was everything. One misstep, a drunken outburst, an inappropriate gift, and a patron might find himself quietly uninvited. His name no longer called, because even the most powerful men knew. In the geisha world, status flowed both ways. To become a geisha was not a single decision. It was a slow unfolding, a path taken step by step, year by year. And for many, it began not in silk and song, but in service. Girls arrived at the okiya, the geisha house, young. Some were just 9 or 10. Most came from rural families, sent to the city with hope and hesitation. Their parents believed in the stability of the trade, a dignified life, carefully structured, surrounded by art and beauty. But for the child who stepped through the paper-screened door, the first year was not gentle. She was a shikomi, a servant in training. She cleaned, she fetched, she ran errands in all weather. She rose before dawn to sweep the walkway, to wash the elders' clothes, to prepare meals she did not eat. If a senior geisha asked for tea, she ran. If the Okasan scolded her, she bowed and thanked her. The Okia was not cruel, but it was disciplined. You learned humility first, before you were allowed to dance. If she persevered, and not all did, the girl would one day become a Minorai, literally one who learns by watching. She would put on a kimono, but not perform. She would attend banquets, but not entertain. She would sit quietly in the corner, observing how a seasoned geisha poured sake, how she shifted her weight as she sat, how she gestured just enough to draw laughter, but never too much. It was performance by osmosis, grace by exposure, and finally, after months of preparation, she would be introduced as a meiko, an apprentice geisha. The transformation was remarkable. Her kimono now burst with color, long sleeves that nearly touched the floor, a red collar that marked her youth, an obi tied in a trailing style that shimmered as she walked. Her face, painted white with care, was offset by bright lips and dark-lined eyes. Her hair, real and styled with wax, was adorned with kansashi, seasonal ornaments made of tortoiseshell, silver, and silk flowers. But appearance was only the beginning. She had to master traditional dance, slow, deliberate movements rooted in centuries of ritual. She studied the shamisen, the fan, the etiquette of conversation. She memorized stories, songs, poetry. She learned to drink tea, to pour sake, to bow at the perfect angle. She rehearsed how to laugh, softly, respectfully, never too loud, never too long. Everything was practiced, and she was never alone. Each meiko was assigned a mentor, a senior geisha called A Onasan, an older sister. This woman would guide her, protect her, chastise her, and, in time, shape her. The bond was powerful, not always warm, but always sacred. The Onasan was responsible for her meiko's reputation, and vice versa. If the apprentice misbehaved, if she drank too much, spoke too boldly, laughed too freely, the shame would fall on both of them. Reputation in the Hanamachi was not personal. It was shared. The daily life of a meiko was full and exhausting. She rose before dawn for lessons, dance in the morning, music after lunch, etiquette in the afternoon, banquets in the evening, sometimes several in a row. She would return to the okia well past midnight, her feet sore from walking, her face aching from hours of held expression. But she said little. To complain was to show weakness. To rest was to fall behind. Every movement was a step toward becoming a full geisha, an artist in her own right, a woman who needed no title, no permission, just presence. To become a full geisha was not marked by fanfare. No great celebration, no parade. Just a quiet ceremony, a change in color, from red to white. The sleeves shortened, the colors deepened, the smile became just a little smaller, and with that, she became a gaiko, as they say in Kyoto, or geisha in the broader Japanese language. The name meant person of art, not entertainer, not companion, not hostess, an artist. And from that day onward, she would carry herself as one. As a geisha, her schedule did not ease. If anything, it intensified. She was now responsible for her own career, booking engagements, maintaining relationships with tea houses, investing in her wardrobe, a significant expense, commissioning new kimonos, maintaining her image. She still danced. She still played shamisen, but more often now, she spoke. She carried conversations at banquets, made introductions, poured tea with a grace that seemed effortless, though it was anything but. And always, she listened. To guests, to clients, to the subtle rhythm of a room. She knew when to make someone laugh, when to change the subject, when to let silence stretch like silk across a floor. But the path was not without cost. The geisha was admired, yes, but not always understood. She did not marry, not officially. She could have relationships, but they were often hidden, quietly discouraged by tradition. Her family, if distant, might drift further. She missed births, weddings, the steady pull of ordinary life. Some geisha would find love, some would not. But all made peace with solitude. Not loneliness, exactly, but a kind of gentle apartness. She belonged to the world, but not fully to anyone in it. A successful evening when the guests left smiling. A dance that drew tears from an audience. An elder geisha who nodded in quiet approval. A new Meiko who looked up to her, nervous, wide-eyed, asking softly how to hold a fan just right. In those moments, the weight was less, and the art, the centuries of training, of memory, of presence, felt worth it. But even in tradition, time moved forward. The world outside the hanamachi changed. Western fashions, faster cities, fewer patrons, fewer girls willing to train. The geisha adapted. Some opened cultural schools. Others hosted tourists, offering glimpses into the past. A few turned to television, or writing, or public lectures, but many simply continued. They walked the same stone streets. They performed the same dances. They poured tea in rooms where their mothers once sat. Not out of stubbornness, but reverence, because to them, the geisha was not an artifact. She was a living tradition. And traditions do not vanish. They are carried quietly in the folds of kimono sleeves. Still, one day, the body no longer danced. The fingers no longer plucked the shamisen strings as cleanly. The voice, though warm, grew faint. Retirement came softly. No farewell tour, no applause, just a final performance. A bow and a slow walk home. She folded her last kimono with the same care she had given her first. She washed the rouge from her lips. She placed her hair ornaments in a box. And then she rested. Her name would remain on the wall of the registry. Her photograph in the album, but her presence would pass into memory. And still, even years later, when young geisha crossed her path, they bowed deeply, respectfully, because they knew she had walked the path, and she had not strayed. Now, the room grows dim. The lantern light softens, and you, listener, have followed her journey. From servant to apprentice, from student to master, from silence to subtle speech. You have felt the weight of silk, heard the rustle of sleeves, watched the candle flicker. This, then, is what it was really like to be a geisha. Not a fantasy, not a fiction, but a life lived slowly, gracefully, with discipline and with pride. Breathe in. Let the stillness surround you and rest as the city of lanterns fades into dream. And now, in today's world, the patrons are fewer, but the spirit of their support endures. Modern sponsors include local cultural boards, art preservation societies, and rare private individuals who understand that keeping this world alive requires more than nostalgia. It demands intention. Some geisha now perform at carefully curated cultural events where tourists listen quietly, cameras respectfully stilled. But to carry forward the grace, speech, and artistic discipline that once defined their lives. There are still those who study the old songs, who copy centuries-old dances step by step, who practice the art of stillness with the same devotion as those who came before. The rooms are smaller now, the voices are fewer, but the geisha remain, not frozen in time, not relics of a vanished past, but quiet bearers of a tradition that continues, whispering across the tatami, bowing gently in a twilight room. They remember what it means to be supported, to be funded, not for profit, but for the preservation of beauty. And in that support, whether from a lord, a patron, or a humble admirer, they find not just survival, but dignity. And so the seasons turn. The old tea houses still open their doors. The lanterns are lit, and the voices, softer now, fewer, still carry songs of another time. But because it remembers what is worth keeping, and the geisha remember. And now, as we step back from the narrow alleys of Kyoto's Hanamachi, from the flickering lanterns and the rustle of silk sleeves. The world of the geisha begins to fade like a dream. You've walked through her days, early mornings of repetition, afternoons of quiet labor, evenings of subtle performance, and nights where stillness settled like mist. You've learned what it meant to be her, not a myth, not a fantasy, but a person. A life defined not by volume, but by grace, not by freedom, but by discipline, not by ownership, but by art. She moved slowly, but with purpose. She spoke sparingly, but with intention. And always she carried within her centuries of memory, woven into each fold of her kimono, each practiced bow, each glance that lingered a moment too long. Geisha, life was never simple. It asked much and gave little in return, except, perhaps, a quiet kind of immortality. Because even now, in your resting mind, she remains, the faint scent of incense, the echo of a shamisen string, the shape of a room lit by candlelight, where voices murmur low, and time seems to stand still. So let the quiet settle now. Let your thoughts loosen and drift like sleeves in motion. You are no longer in the world of noise, but in a room behind a paper screen. Safe, still, surrounded by centuries of calm. Breathe in, exhale slowly. Let the past cradle you, coo and sleep softly